As part of the -1 journey, we try to bring folks who have previously gone through this experience of trying to figure out, what am I going to do next? And then ending up arriving at sort of a great new venture to come and just share their experiences. And when Aditya and Ruchi extended the opportunity for me to start a series of designer founders to come and talk about their -1 journey, Julie Zhuo was right at the very top of my list. And I just wanted to go through a couple of these before I asked her to come and speak so that I felt confident that I would do an adequate job of moderating. And so I'm ready for this conversation today. Julie Zhuo and I go way back. We grew up together at Facebook, and we were part of the early Facebook design team. And I admire Julie so much because she has had a storied career at Facebook, helping that organization scale and grow to be one of the most formidable design organizations on the planet. And after leaving Facebook, Julie started a company. And I want to kind of start with that story. Let's start with the -1 journey of how you go from leading the design organization at a huge consumer company to co-founding Sundial.
Well, hey everyone. So I just have to tell you, I'm a designer, or I self-identify as a designer, and a lot of this is because of Soleio and Ruchi. Ruchi was my mentor, quote, quote, although on my first day at Facebook, she told me that she couldn't be my mentor because she was going to go do this new job called PM, which she hadn't figured out yet what it was. But suffice to say, she could not be my mentor, and I need to go find somebody else. And then she asked me, what kind of engineering do you do? Because I joined as an engineer. And I was like, oh, I'd like to do the stuff that people see, the front end. And then promptly brought me over to the table with Soleio and Jared and a bunch of other people. And that is how I became a designer. So I joke that, yes, I was an imposter designer for many years because I had people like you next to me who actually had done design and knew about the art of design. And I've learned so much tremendously from you. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And I would be, I need to also say that Julie is a best-selling author. And one of the things that I really uniquely admire about her is how she explores these new areas of growth and then formalizes them and then crushes it at her first book, The Making of a Manager, does an exquisite job of explaining what that period was like at Facebook, but more importantly, that personal journey of transitioning from being an IC at a fast-growing company to managing people like oneself and how to sort of find that courage from within. And I keep going back to the thing that I often observe keeps designers from founding is a risk aversion, a fear of the unknown. And I'm kind of curious if we can start there about, what happened before Sundial came to be? How did you arrive at the decision to start a company? And what was like navigating that obstacle, finding the courage to start?
That's a really great question, because I think the story actually starts way before, even before Facebook. I was at Stanford. I took a class called the Mayfield Fellows Program, and that was the program that really introduced me to the idea of startups, because I grew up kind of sheltered and I came to Stanford. I didn't really know that much about what is Silicon Valley. I studied computer science because I wanted a stable job. And this program really introduced me to this idea that hey, there's these things called VCs, and they give money to people, and then people in their garages will figure out something and make a company, and then boom, change the world. And so I was obviously very enamored with the story, and I just thought, this is so cool. People, like me, can go out and do something. But to your point, I was very, very risk averse. I'm a first generation immigrant to this country, and I had very risk averse parents where stability was the most important thing. And so I didn't believe that I could start a company. And the Mayfield experience stayed with me. I joined Facebook because even though I couldn't start a company on my own, I was like, okay, maybe I want to join a company, and I want to join a company of a product that I used. But I think that was what I could do. And I always tell people, now, I think it took me as long as it did, because if I had been braver, I would have done it earlier. And I think that Facebook was very much a process for me of realizing that whatever I'm doing, I'm really unprepared for. So joining the design team, I truly felt like an imposter for so many years, because I didn't grow up doing this. Like I made some websites for fun, but I was like trained as an engineer, and then I'm, sitting next to people like you, and you guys like know all this stuff. In fact, I remember some of our earlier portfolio reviews where we would, we were growing, so we were constantly hiring new designers, and I sat in my first portfolio review, so we're like looking at all these design portfolios, and I am just really terrified because I can't tell the difference between like a real, like I see all these and I'm like, they all seem good to me. Like I can't actually tell which ones stand out, but I'm trying to pretend like I'm not an idiot in front of people. So, but really what I was doing, I think, was just trying to absorb and learn from people like you for as much as I could. And I think that journey of being at Facebook for many years where this just repeatedly happened, right? So, I'm learning to be a designer for a couple years. Okay, I think I suck at this job, but then somehow I am now asked to be a manager of designers, which I'm totally also unprepared for and suck at this job. And then eventually, anytime I'm starting to get comfortable, the job changes. And now I'm like managing managers of designers, which I totally suck at that job. And I think that process of doing that, I would say after maybe 7 or 8 years, I started to realize, oh wait, if I look back on things, I feel like I've grown a lot. And that's also a very satisfying feeling to look back and realize how far one has come. And then it took a couple more years for me to start to like put 2 and 2 together. That is the feeling of growth. Like feeling like an imposter is the price you pay in order to then grow and have this very satisfying feeling looking backward. And so somehow, I think I understood this logically earlier than I could really understand it emotionally, I would say. I still think it is, true for me that like sometimes things are hard and like it's scary and I kind of feel a resistance. Like I don't want to do it because I don't want to fail and I don't want to not know what I'm doing, and I don't want to, and it's like, it's a fear. Like it really is. That's what it comes down to. It's insecurity. It's a fear. But little by little, I've kind of realized that is like what we need to do, or what I need to do in order to feel proud. Ultimately, like that's the price of admission.
And with respect to the decision to kind of like start to explore and dabble like the idea of entrepreneurship, one of the things that I feel like often you lose texture on is the decision on who to start with. I feel like a lot of designers who want to found are often stuck on the like, well, who do I team up with? Like, how do I find a co-founder? What's the backstory on how you arrived at Sundial and you ended up testing the waters on a creative collaboration of that magnitude?
So I met my co-founder Chandra at Facebook. He was leading analytics while I was leading design. And we have very different brains. Like we just look at problems really differently. But I think since the beginning, I just found myself really drawn to him. Like I admired him. I just liked hanging out with him. And I think it came down to just the fact that we have very similar values. So even though we approach problems very differently, I think we have like a very core values thing that really connected us. Like we just, I don't know, we cared about people in very similar ways. We had a drive to learn and be better. I think he was probably, in fact, in a lot of ways, I would say further along in that journey than me. Like he is just one of the most, Zen people that you've ever met. Like he's meditated for years. Like I think he just felt very centered and very grounded. And I think I found myself like very attracted to that. Like I thought I could learn a lot from him by being more, spend more time with him. Anyways, he left Facebook a couple years before me, went to Sequoia Capital. He was the chief data officer. And so when I decided it was time for me to go and do something scary, because after 14 years at one place, I realized that the rate of growth was starting to almost like slow down for me a little bit. Like in some ways, like managing a team of 200 is like not that different than managing a team of 450 at that scale. Like so the rate of change of the company was less. And I reached out to Chandra because I thought he had seen a bunch of stuff so he could give me advice. And we had such an incredible lunch. And he told me, he surprised me right away by saying, I've decided to leave Sequoia, it's not the right place for me. And then we just were like, we should work together. And we didn't know what we were gonna do, but I kid you not, I think it was in that first or maybe the next week where we had lunch again, we were now talking about working together for like 30 years or 40 years. We're like, we're gonna work together for decades. Just assume that. We're gonna work together for decades. We don't know what we're gonna do, but we just think that, like you're a person that I trust. And it'll just be really fun to come to work every day and just to figure stuff out. And in those 30 years, we're like, we could go invest. We could go and do something in education, which we're both very passionate about. We could go and build some products that we think would be valuable. Maybe we can go and like consult with some companies. You know, it's just like the world's our oyster.
So it was less like the problem space, more just like the energy between two people.
Yes.
And sort of, and so if you were to give advice to designers watching this, they're just like, what are the cues to look for? What are the things to look for that sort of will give you a solid foundation for exploring that type of creative collaboration?
I think it is, do we have the right reasons, or same reasons, I should say, like compatible reasons for wanting to work together and what we're trying to get out of it? And I would say, secondly, do we have similar values about what the feeling of a great company should be? I think those two things are probably the most important qualities to talk about. I think there's also an element of like, okay, what does that feeling mean? You know, like meaning if we have a disagreement, what will happen, right? Like, do we value the person behind it? Do we value like a rational way of discussing it? Like, it's these types of intangibles, I would say, much more so than do we have the same perspective about like a problem or problem space? Like, we actually, even to this day, like we argue all the time. We like don't see eye to eye on a lot of different things. Like, it's been hard in the past, especially when it relates to things around strategy. But I think we've always found a way to get back to like, no, but we care so much about, you know, the long term. We care so much about like trying to build the best product. We care so much about our customers. Like, that's something that really unites us. And so towards that end, we will like figure out whatever differences we have. I think that's meant a lot, and I continue to believe that we will work together for like decades and decades, even if like, you know, the problems may change, but I hope the relationship can endure.
That's awesome. I also love, I'm learning for the first time that you didn't sort of arrive at the idea of Sundial from the get-go, right? It always seems obvious in retrospect, but it sounded like you guys were exploring different avenues. That is the -1 journey. How did you go about that together, and how did design help shape that process for you?
Yeah. So we were like, all right, we're going to work together for 30 years. We don't know what to do. When you don't know what you're going to do, the easiest thing is to go and consult. So we went and we're like, okay, we're going to go and talk with a bunch of companies and just see if we can help them out in their product, their strategy, design, right? Like, you know, just kind of hire the two of us as fractional people who can help with like product and strategy. And I think we had this vision of, okay, let's just work with like 4 or 5 companies, and every single day we'll like show up at a different company. So like Monday it'll be this place, and Tuesday, and like, you know, we'll embed with the team because we really like working with people in person, like getting rolling up our sleeves and getting in there. And then I think we signed our first company. We went to their office. It was awesome. And the next day it was COVID. So then everything shut down. So we did not get to really fulfill that vision. So we did end up signing a couple other companies. We were consulting. So for like that first year, we were just working with companies. And, you know, we both come from the same DNA at Facebook. And so Facebook, as many of you may know, is like a very operationally rigorous company. It's like analytically super, super strong and tight around that. And so a lot of like how we think about understanding how to do product, and it's like, you got to really understand what people are doing, you know, understand your users, understand their behaviors, which meant that we wanted to look at things like from that data lens. But a lot of these companies just weren't terribly sophisticated. They just weren't that mature about understanding what it was that their customers were doing through the product, and maybe sometimes they would have other means to do so. And so often they would be like, well, but tell us how you guys would build products at Facebook. And we would explain things, and ultimately it just came down to like, but if we don't know what people are actually doing and what's going on, it's very hard. Like, you know, we're just like shooting from the hip a little bit, right? And so it was through those conversations we're like, you know, it would be great if we could just build some internal tools that might help our customers that we're consulting with. And I think Chandra, from his time at Sequoia, had this insight that he's worked with many, many fast-growing companies, that it's just everyone's like reinventing the wheel a little bit inside their company. They are they're trying to build like the data stack, and they're all asking like, oh, what should we track, like, and like how should we build our dashboards, and like, you know, what should we understand about what it is. And he's like, there's just so many patterns across these different companies. Sure, every single company is unique in some way, but like 80% of what a consumer SaaS company cares about is going to be shared by like the next consumer SaaS company. And if there's just a way to like possibly automate or build these things, then it'll be quite efficient, and we would be able to help a lot. And so we decided to just hire a couple contractors and just start playing around with ideas, and so that's kind of the early phase. Again, we weren't still thinking about starting Sundial, but about 6 months later, we're like, oh, this is really fun. Like, this actually playing around with products and like working and building is really, really fun. And we should just like wind down consulting and decide to focus on this fully. And that's when we decided to like incorporate.
I love it. And I am a big believer that code names are destiny, and Sundial is just a wonderful name. How did you arrive at Sundial? What does it sort of imbue that you feel like is really central to the company and the product?
For me, coming from like a design background, people often say, well, wait, you're working in data? What's going on? Like, that's like really, really different. And I think the thing that connects me, and this is true, I think, of most designers, like every amazing designer I've ever worked with, like we just care so much about understanding what the user is feeling and what they want. It's like, I always go back to, if I had a magic wand, I would be able to read the user's mind. I think we talk about this a lot, right? Like, we just want to know what it is they feel and what's like really going on in their heads. And if we knew that, we would be able to build something amazing for them. And because we can't, though, we have to rely on proxies. And sometimes a proxy is like us, like, okay, we're the user ourselves, so like, what do we want? Or like, what do our friends want? It's obviously much easier for a consumer company. But sometimes a proxy can be, like, okay, what are the consumers doing? Or sometimes it's user research, like let's have them walk through a prototype and like, let's see their body language. How are they reacting? What are they getting stuck on? Or let's talk to them in a user interview, okay? Or like look at customer logs, or let's look at like what they're writing in and complaining about, like to our customer success agents. But all of that to me is like data. It's like all proxies for this thing I really want, which is I wish I could read the user's mind. And the like pursuit, to me, like it's like the pursuit of truth. Like, you just want to know what is really true. Now, in my less secure moments, I like to believe that I'm a genius and that everything I come up with is awesome, and like my idea is like the killer idea, and I just want people to like it. But in reality, we all know that does not a great product make. Yeah. I think if you want to make a great product, you kind of have to be like, all right, ego, like settle down. Let's actually go for what is true. What is true? What is really happening in reality here? And absorb that and use that to help us do something better. And like, I think that's the thing that always fascinated me about like the pursuit of data, the pursuit of analytics. It's like the mental model. And I think about that because, I think one of the things I was thinking about is like, I just think the joy of any career is like, you wake up, you get to work with people you really like on really interesting problems. And I think the most interesting problems in my mind are the ones that feel very universal. So at Facebook, for example, it was this idea of like connection, right? Like, we are human, we all want connection. We want to not be alone. We don't want to feel lonely, right? We have friends, we have family, and it's like this yearning. And nothing is ever going to solve this, I don't think. Again, I mean, barring crazy AI, implant in our mind or whatever, we become like the singularity. But I just feel like, we keep, like, technology can help us, right? No doubt that like the telephone makes it easier to connect with people, and then the internet makes it easier, and like WhatsApp or Messenger or like Facebook is, social media has made it easier. But I don't think we've solved human connection, and we never will. And that is what makes it such an interesting problem, because it is universal, and it'll likely, we'll keep coming up with better and better, but we'll probably never fully reach it. And I feel the same way about, like, I'm not, if you're like, hey, Julie, like, isn't it so, like, you're working on like a dashboard replacement. Like, I don't think that is interesting. I don't find like BI or dashboarding or analytics to be the interesting problem. But I think data is here for a reason. And the reason is because we want truth. And why do we want truth? Because we are fundamentally scared of an uncertain future. Like, we want to be able to control our future destiny. And that is why we invent things. And to me, like, the sundial, the question of sundial, represents like one of the first instruments of human measurement. One of the first instruments, and like, understanding how to measure time it has helped us. It helps us with farming, right? It's helped us like figure out how we can start to tame the environment around us so that we won't be hungry and so that we'll have a little bit more control over like when the winter comes, are we going to have enough food to eat? And I think that is like the history of how we've always been as humans. And I think that'll always probably be how we will be like extrapolating into the future.
I love it. And it's like, yeah, this notion of like telemetry, to being able to like measure in order to understand, and to understand it, you have to be able to predict it and then have those predictions come true. Zooming now back to B2B SaaS though, right? What was it like going from like a consumer background to this entirely new way of making software and selling software and deploying it? I feel like one of the things that I'm always fascinated with is how, you know, you go through the experience of working at a large organization, you're shipping to lots of people, you go through a hyperscaling moment, and you decide after that, I'm gonna go and start a new business. And that process for a lot of folks is the shedding of processes and knowledge and patterns that are not applicable to the 0 to 1 phase. What was that process like for you, given that you went through a long, incredible arc at Facebook and you started again? Which parts did you have to unlearn after having your tenure there?
So much, honestly, so much. I would say for us, the 0 to 1 journey was incredibly slow. And I think the reason it was incredibly slow was because there's so much to unlearn and then have to learn. And I would say that one of, like, you know, when I was reflecting with my team, probably like 2 years in, one of the major things that became clear to me that honestly I wish I knew like on day one was I just was so used to at Facebook, since I was managing a very large team, being like very 30,000 foot, you know, like very high level, very like, all right, I'm going to delegate these things. All right, let's think about the strategy, but not really in the details, because it'd been a long time since I was in the details. And obviously I knew this intellectually. I'm like, okay, I'm going to start a startup. So there's not very many of us. So we have to like roll up our sleeves and get in the details. But still the mentality wasn't there. Like, does that make sense? So it's like, even though I intellectually knew that and I felt like I was doing that, I wasn't embracing it in the same way, because it was like just so habitual for me to think about like, oh, I should hire people to do that, instead of being like, wait, just like sit down and think through this problem and like get out, you know, your tools and like start actually creating or writing some code or doing some design work. And so that was a really big one, is like, how do I get back into the details again and roll up my sleeves? I think I had a lot of biases about coming from consumer. So for example, coming from consumer, I have always felt that the product speaks for itself. You know, it's like you have to show people the product, you don't really get a chance to talk to them, and then they use it and they decide for themselves. And then every single person I talked to who'd been in B2B is like, no, like that's not really how it works. Like, have you gone to Dreamforce or seen Sales? They basically like, I mean, they're like, you know, I heard someone told me this story, like, you know, at Salesforce, they literally like they're saying, this is our idea, let's go pitch it at our big conference. And then if a lot of customers tell us that they're excited, we will build it. And I was like, wait, what? Like, and it was so foreign to me, right? And I'm not saying that that's like what we, you know, I mean, that's likely an exaggeration, but I think it's like clearly B2B SaaS moves a lot more in the direction of like, you have to talk to people and you have to, you know, understand their needs. And in some ways you have to like tailor the thing that you have to their needs, because everyone's very different and they pay you on day one. So therefore, if they now have to ask you for a thing, you kind of have to like respect that, right? It's very different than like 1 million users and it's like a free product and someone's like, I would love this. And you're like, well, you're the only one who loves that, so no. You know, like, there's so many dynamics that are quite different about having like a paying client, especially someone who's paying you a lot of money, and realizing that every company is slightly different in what they need and what their politics are, and like who is the person who's buying, and just being able to adapt to that. So all of that was also extremely foreign to me, and I think that we were probably, I would say, I likely wasn't a good, like this prevented me from being a very good salesperson for quite a while. Because I'd always go like, oh, I learned this thing, let's go and like make the product better and better and better. And it wasn't maybe a co-creation, or it wasn't like sort of like as of much of a dialogue with the early customers. And so that is like another big list. So again, lots and lots of things that had to be learned and unlearned.
And what did you learn as far as like sales is concerned? Because one of the things that's interesting to me is this act of you described as co-creation. Part of it is you're arriving at a story for the customer to hear around like, well, why does Sundial matter, and why does it matter to you? But I think there's also the story internally of like, well, why does Sundial matter to us? Like, what is it that we're trying to evangelize? And it's not merely just like, here's software that's useful to you, install it and use it. There's more to be sold behind that, around numeracy, around like understanding the world in order to predict it, and then be able to run experiments and just have like a real grapple on reality. What has been useful to you in that journey of like becoming more effective at sales and integrating a company's story with its sales strategy?
Yeah, a lot of it for me is, I go back to like, I don't think there's a shortcut for it. Like I read a bunch of the sales books. I talked to many, many people, but unless you just go through the reps, I think it's hard to build an intuition for this stuff. And what I mean by intuition is like, it's just basically realizing there are patterns. So when you talk to hundreds of people over time, you start to realize that there are like these subtle patterns. Like a very, like a simple one might be, a lot of times people aren't willing or they're not thinking about change if there's not that much that has changed. So if I go into a company and they've been using similar tools and they've been doing like data the same way for like 4 or 5 years, and there's like, oftentimes they will look at our product and our demo and they're like, oh, this is really cool, this is really exciting, because they're seeing something new and we're doing something, innovative, but there's not really a reason for them to change what they're doing, right? It's like not so broken. So a lot of times people are just like, oh, this is kind of maybe like, to them, it's like a vitamin. Whereas if a company has a new leader that came in, the new leader is now at that moment of change. Like that person obviously wants to understand how the company works, but has been likely hired with this idea, like they're going to be here and they're going to make some changes. And so often new leaders are much more receptive to the idea of like, oh, we were using this tool before, let's actually invest in some, like we're here to think about the future. Or if the team hasn't changed, but like the leadership has changed, or the leadership has like a totally new priority, like AI. Like a lot of leaders are like, we got to do AI, guys. We got to invest in AI, do AI, right? And if these things happen, then that might create more of an environment of change. And so it's kind of hard. It's like these are all just cues that ultimately you start to get, and then it becomes more obvious, like when you talk to companies, because you start to, pattern match a little bit more. But I haven't found a way, I've had many people give me advice. It's like the advice is, it's almost like it speaks to the intellectual brain, but it doesn't speak to kind of like what's intuitive. And unless you go through the reps, I feel like it's hard to build that intuition. So I think maybe what I learned from this is like, sometimes there's no shortcut. Sometimes you just have to go in there and be like, yeah, I'm gonna suck at this for like the first 20 times, 50 times that I do it. But if I do it 100 times, I think I'm gonna start learning and I'm starting to get a feel for it. And then likely from there, we will continue to iterate and get better. Sometimes there just aren't shortcuts.
And with the, one of the things that I remember was true about Facebook early on was how much we dog fooded the product. We were constantly eating our own product, sitting in front of the site. Any changes that were rolled out to dev, we experienced firsthand as consumers. How are you using Sundial to kind of inform the shape and the future of Sundial as a product? How is it incorporated into the product roadmap? And then how is that folded back into the theory of Sundial, your evolving philosophy about how data and design kind of merge? That intersection, I think, is at the crux of this conversation.
Yeah, it's hard for me to, I think, be a really good designer or product person if I'm not like a user of it. So I think that has been one of the other things that have been challenging. I think that's probably why like consumer software is often much better designed and it feels more intuitive than SaaS software, because oftentimes the people who are designing the SaaS software are not the users. So you're feeling, secondhand what the problem is, right? And so the shortcut to that is like, I just had to try and learn to be a better analyst. And that's hard because like, I'm not, it's like not the thing that I was very good at, but I was like, I have to actually just do more analysis myself, and I have to try and do it, off of Sundial. I have to try and do it on Sundial, and I have to like actually try to, almost like download in some way, like what is like the mental processes, or what's like somebody who's like in this job going to do it. And even if I learn to become a great analyst, I probably don't have the experience of like what is it like at a large company. So in those cases, I just have to like talk to as many people as possible to learn that thing. But I think you're absolutely right. Like it's really hard when you're not the user yourself, or you haven't been in that particular role that you're trying to sell to. I do, the thing that I do that also I think helps me though is like, I kind of try and think about it like, but really what is the goal here? What's the goal with data? And I go back to like, it isn't just that I want to make something that helps the data practitioner at the current company do well. I mean, that's awesome. But if I like unpeel the layers, it's like, what is the job of that person anyway? Okay, the job of that person is because, you know, people at the company, right? Maybe the CEO, the C-suite, the you know, head of product managers, engineers, everyone's trying to make some decisions. They're trying to figure out what should I prioritize, feature A or feature B. They're trying to figure out like, you know, I want to figure out the right distribution channel. Should I be like investing in blogs or should I like run some TikTok ads? You know, like everyone's got questions, and ultimately the questions come because, and you know, it goes back to like we want to make the best choice and find the right answer, but like it's uncertain. So then we feel like really nervous. And that's why we like seek out information that will help us. And the way that companies work today is that, you know, they're like, okay, great. Well, our current solution is we're going to hire a team of people, and that'll be our data team, and they will be our liaison. Like we'll have the question, we'll ask the data analyst. The data analyst will like figure it out. We'll trust them, like because you know they're going to know how to speak the language of data, and they will know how to translate the business question or the product question into a data question, which has a bunch of methods, and you call them like analytical techniques, which are good proxies for answering like whatever is the business question. And then that person will go and execute and run a bunch of SQL queries and find the right tables, and then they'll like present back the report to the user, right? And it goes back to like, if I limit the problem to be solved to just like, how would I make that person's life better? Then there's like one way of solving it. But then I'm like, do we really even need that? Like in the future, you know, like could we just have people talk to a system or a product and get their questions answered? And so I think that if I think just bigger and bigger, or like more and more, like I would say like maybe just back to like, what is the real root problem that we're trying to solve, which goes back to like, it's uncertainty, it's trying to control our destiny, it's trying to like make good decisions so we all make, you know, billions of dollars in the future. Then is there a way that we could actually open the market, like increase the market of people who actually would think of themselves as data people, right? And there's like a storytelling element to doing that, and there's like a way of like, you know, I think we all like nowadays even too with like Replit, Cursor, it's like many more people feel like they can build things. You wouldn't have called yourself an engineer before perhaps, but now the tools getting better means you can get the thing that you want, right? And so I think not maybe being too tied to roles or like how things are today, but just continuing to unpeel, like what is the first principles of this thing? And allows us to maybe, you know, go beyond. And then I'm like, yeah, I'm that person. Like I'm a person who has like a lot of questions about what we should prioritize. And so in that way, if I think about what would be perfect for me, it allows me to almost like put myself more intuitively in the shoes of the user.
And I love that you describe the process as like, you know, the data analytics team, the way that you describe it almost sounds like sorcery, that like it feels archaic, even though it's like the state of the art right now for a lot of companies. And we're sort of, you know, stuck in the status quo. Brass tacks wise though, if you are presenting a company a tool that is, you know, subtly or openly hostile to an entire team, like what's it like navigating this? Because for a lot of the companies that will emerge from South Park Commons or in this current vintage, they are in fact extremely disruptive to existing roles. And that's sort of going to be part of the cost of doing business going forward, part of the transition of AI. How are you currently navigating that? How are you thinking about, you know, both a combination of ICP, but also in practice, helping existing data analysts or people that are going to be very reluctant to see tools like this emerge, act as like potential obstacles to adoption?
Yeah. It's a really great point because we actually do face this. Like we talk to large companies, and then you know there'll be people who get excited about it. Usually it's like the non-data people, and then sometimes the data team will mount a resistance, which often means they'll be like, we don't need this. We can build this ourselves. That's a very common one. We'll build this ourselves internally, right? Or this isn't that good. Like, like look at all the stuff that we've already built. So this has definitely happened, and we've actually lost some deals because of it. So the thing that we've learned is like you just have to find the right person at the company. And again, it goes back to like usually it's like the head of product is the kind of person who's like, you know what? Like I don't feel like the organization is getting answers fast enough, and they're a little bit less like, hey, if that means in the future we might not need like right now we have like 20 people who just make dashboards. Like, do we really need that? Like they're a little bit more distant that they can think, so usually the higher up you go in a company, the less that person might be personally attached to, exactly the way that we do things. So that's one angle is like we have to find the right person at the company. And we've learned that we should actually talk more to the product people and the consumers of data, and who, the people who are like the bosses often of the people who run the data teams. So that's angle one. The second is just smaller companies or startups. Often it's like, okay, so we have a bunch of like startups who are also our clients. They're obviously very different. So one of the challenges is like, we were like, are we being crazy for having these two very different ICPs? Everyone knows in SaaS, like the money is with the larger companies, right? So if you want like very ambitious ARR goals, like it's the large companies that are going to pay you millions of dollars or very, very large ACV accounts. But I think if you want to make your product like more future forward, it's the startups and the small companies that are really going to push your product into being better, right? And now, again, you have to have time, play, and kind of do its thing. And I think about, for example, cloud. That's like an analogy I pull at all the time. And I'm like, okay, 20 years ago, every company had like a team of people who would configure servers, right? They'd like buy the servers, rack the servers, like install a bunch of software on the servers. It's like I think called the SysOps team. Yep. And at Facebook, we have a killer team who does this. And in fact, the killer team, the high talent density teams, will do a bunch of innovations, like open source a bunch of things, like now build servers in like a totally different way. But then lo and behold, Amazon introduces like the cloud, and I'm sure they like pitched companies like Facebook, and Facebook's like, no freaking way, we have like a crack team, like we're going to do our own innovative thing, like we don't need this, like your product's not as good as what we're doing. But then they go to these startups and you're like starting a company, like, do I really want to hire like a team of people to help me manage servers, or do I just want to like hire people to work on the thing that I want to work on, right? And it's been out 20 years. I heard the stat the other day that like still some crazy number, like 30 or 40% of large Fortune 500 companies are still not on cloud. But of course, cloud has transformed the industry. Like you'd be crazy to be like a news company and like want to rack your own servers. And sometimes this transformation just takes a long time, right? But if you'd only ever gone after the big companies, you wouldn't have innovated in this way. And so I think even for Sundial, like we need to have these small companies. For those small companies, it's like, do you really want to have to build a very large data engineering and data analyst team? Or now in the AI age, would you rather do more with less? And I think most people here in this room or most like smaller companies are sort of like, we just want to do more with less, right? We just think AI helps each of us do way more. And do we need to hire like a bunch of these different roles? I don't know. And so I think we want to kind of try and do that for the data world.
I'm glad that you brought up AI because obviously you started this company before GPT. And so there's like a whole set of companies, the pre-GPT companies that are now in this gravitational well. And there was one path that you were on, and now this gravitational well is kind of forcing you to pursue a new path. Some will suffer, some will suddenly be able to lean into a whole bunch of new capabilities that actually is advantageous to them. And just as recently as like the last 2 weeks, we're seeing like a lot of announcements around agents and specific technologies that allow for computers to just kind of go and run amok and do things for us that don't require anything that's necessarily user-facing to get things done. It just has to do more with like reporting back and making sure that there's the right kind of training regimes and guidance so that like key jobs are accomplished correctly. In this massive paradigm shift, how are you navigating that with Sundial? How do you envision this playing out long term? And how are you helping your customers navigate it as well in a world where we know that software is going to go through a major revolution? and you have to be running a business through that transition. What are you learning about like change management and evolving a product strategy with technologies that are being announced hours ago, days ago?
Yeah, there's one funny story, which is that before, we were experimenting with all the GPTs and LLMs. Like we were like, okay, we need to, our dream thing is like our product would produce like a really awesome report, like something that a really, excellent product analyst would be able to generate. And at one point we were trying to like figure out how to create headlines deterministically. And then it was just like this giant spaghetti of like if-else statements where we were just like, shit, man, like English is complicated and like it's really hard to do this like this is not working well, like we have to give up on that. So in some ways I think we were like waiting for this kind of technology to emerge, which actually helps us a ton in our products. So we're extremely excited. But I think what's also interesting for us is like, we know the technology is getting better, and so I think it's hard to predict like where things are. I mean, a lot of people out there are like saying all sorts of different things about like, oh, this is what will happen in 2 years. Like we'll have AGI in 2 years. No, we won't. I think that what we try to go back to is like, okay, this is our mission, and like we'll just use whatever technology best accomplishes it. But what's hard is like, I think for us, it's basically where do we draw the boundaries of what should be done deterministically, in kind of the traditional way, and then what should be done with generative AI or LLMs, right? And like there's still pros and cons, to kind of, and there's like clearly areas like generating text or headlines or synthesis where like, I think we can all be in the room be like, yeah, that's just gonna be better done with like an LLM than any. But in data, there's a lot of other stuff where it's frankly like faster, it's cheaper, and like you really don't want the LLM to quote you a wrong number, like ever. Right? Like this is like particular to the space. Obviously, it's very different if you're like doing, creative media generation or all of that. But like, there's certain things where like there's algorithms and there's just right factual answers, and we have to be very careful about like, sure, yes, the LM can do that, but like, is that actually a better experience given what people want? Now, the agentic stuff allows us to be able to do things like deep analysis. It's sort of like ChatGPT, except like it does that with your like data, and it does ask it a business question, and it like will go in and do that. But it goes back to like people want to, a lot of times with data in particular, like there's a trust element. Like a lot of times, the reason why I might trust what an analyst says is because we worked together for a very, very long time. And like I know this person's judgment, but if like this is the first time I'm working with an analyst, how will I know if their analysis is good? I don't just trust it off the bat. Like I actually am going to look for, if you tell me we should focus on feature A versus B, like show me your work. Like I'm gonna have to in the beginning days like be very careful about understanding what is the work. Like, do you seem competent? Do you seem like you understand the business context? Does it feel like you're detail-oriented and thorough? And after I see enough reps of that, I might just trust what you say without having to go into the work. But it's very, very important to show the work. And I think so in our domain, like that's like, so we're gonna build and we're gonna say, hey, you should do this. We better have like a very clear, like this is the work that we did. And you know what companies are gonna do? They're gonna be like, oh, well, I'm gonna have to trust the analyst to tell me if this, like whatever this agent is doing is sensible, right? And so we have to basically be able to prove that, right? We have to earn the trust of the customer in that way. And so there's like a particular dynamic in which that's gonna happen. And I think we have to understand that's part of what we have to show up and be able to convince people of.
I love that. I'm also kind of curious about the exercise of cultivating a culture that imbues the qualities that you think will make for a great product experience. And especially as we're transitioning in the medium, right? That we're creating these new systems and they have like new ergonomics, new interfaces, new powers. I felt in so many different ways, Facebook culture was uniquely fit for internet software, consumer internet software. It's like all the things that helped Facebook succeed were rooted in speed, malleability, not being super precious, being hyper experimental, all these cultural qualities we looked for, being hyper competitive, all these qualities I think emerged from the culture of the team. And I didn't appreciate at the time how responsible, the founders and the leadership were in hiring for the qualities that would ensure alignment between the nature of the team and the nature of the product and the nature of the technology. And so kind of zooming towards 2025, 2026, as we're going through this paradigm shift, what are the qualities that you find yourself looking for in your leaders, in the people that you hire, the things that you're trying to recognize because you feel like it creates this same sort of natural alignment between team and product strategy? What are the things that you hire for that you think are going to be the foundation for a lot of these attributes that you just described and what you want to reinforce with Sundial's mission?
A great question. I think probably adaptability, which often comes from like people who can really break down problems into first principles. So I think if you're able to do that, oftentimes it's, it goes back to like, you're not as tied to like old ways of doing things, because it means that you can actually look at the context and be able to like drill down to like, okay, what's really unique about this particular thing and how do we kind of build back up? So I think you can call it, truth seeking, or maybe you can call it like, some ways I sometimes think it comes off as like there's an ego detachment, if that makes sense, right? And I think that's almost like the most important quality that I look for right now. It's not so much like your skill of where you are. It's like, do I think you're going to be a person who will learn very, very quickly and adapt? And because like everything around us is changing so fast. And obviously change can be very unsettling. It can be hard. It can be disorienting. It can make us feel, again, like, and when people feel disoriented or uncertain, oftentimes it means that they lose more confidence. Like there's like a less of a sense of like being able to have a strong point of view. But I think you need that, right? I think we still need that. We need to operate not out of a sense of like fear and like reactivity, but from like a groundedness. And I think that groundedness has to come from a person who is not so attached to the outcome of their work, but again is able to really break things down and then rebuild back up. And I think I've gotten better at trying to spot for this, and it goes back to like having done like hundreds of interviews and having hired people that some of them which worked out beautifully and some of them which didn't. I think I'm developing a better feel for it, but it's also really hard. It's hard to assess because it's so intangible. It's also hard to find people like that.
A question I often get is about this false dichotomy, this tension between design intuition and data, right? Where like sometimes the data is telling you to do one thing, but your intuition, your qualitative sense is telling you, well, maybe we should try this other path. What advice do you give to founders and designers on navigating that tension when like maybe the data may suggest taking an alternate path, but you feel deep down in your bones, no, I think this will actually, maybe this will have an immeasurable quality that'll really translate to the end customer? Like, how do you personally navigate that dichotomy?
I think a lot of times I go back to like the intuition is there for a reason. We kind of have to like dig a little deeper and figure out why is that happening. Now, there's usually one of two things can be true. The first is that the intuition is just actually, let's call it a bias from past experience, right? So for example, I had a very strong intuition early on that we should go product-led growth in our strategy for our product. And I was like, no, this feels really right. But when I looked at it, like, why did I feel that way? Well, it's because it's what I was familiar with, right? I came through consumer companies. I going back to my bias is like the product should be super. Again, I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm just saying this is a bias that I had. And so the reason that it felt good for me to go and do PLG, honestly, is because I was comfortable and familiar. Whereas like doing this enterprise sales where I have to build like a sales team was like unfamiliar to me and I didn't know how to do it. And if I'm being truthful, like I think that's kind of where that inkling came from, not because like it actually is a better strategy. And in fact, I was able to over time realize that like, okay, actually the reason why, and you look at all these other data companies, like the most of them go back to like their enterprise. Why is that? It's because there's only a handful of people at a company who can make the decision that I'm gonna allow another third-party vendor to have access to my data. Data is very sensitive. Like the average person at the company can't just be like, oh yeah, let me go like throw some metrics into this like new tool and try it out in PLG style. You can do that for like video conferencing. You can do that even for like note taking. You can do that for a design tool, but you can't really do that for the data. So the structure of the nature of data is what makes it so that it's actually quite hard to build. I mean, you can do it for like Excel spreadsheets and like, kind of, but like if you were like, here's all my company key KPIs and metrics, like somebody senior up has to make that decision, and there's only a handful of them, and you better just talk to them directly, right? So that's actually the logical reason. But again, my intuition was like, oh, we should do it. But again, it didn't come from, I think, like a first principles thinking. It came just from like familiarity. Now, there are instances, like for a lot of times, I think, especially with designers, like, you're like, this is not a good experience. I think a lot of times that's quite true, because it goes back to like, if you really fundamentally thought a lot about like, what is the user and what's their experience and what is an easy one, and you just have like a lot of, I would say, like past grounding in knowing what is like a good user experience, and you're like, this is not a good one, probably you're right in a bunch of contexts, right? There still may be some that you're wrong, because again, if you're not that user, you may be biasing towards like what you would want rather than what that particular user would want. So I think that it's quite nuanced, because you have to almost like be able to evaluate like, how good are you? How good will your intuition be? Because how much like experience do you have in that particular context? If that makes sense. And if you don't actually have a lot of experience in that context, it's a good chance that your bias is just because you're gravitating to what you're familiar with, not because it's actually quite rational for the situation that you're in.
All right, I'm gonna glaze you for a minute, because I did a little bit of homework for this conversation, and I listened to a convo you had with Lenny, and what I learned was that your writing online in the Looking Glass inspired Lenny's entire journey, pursuing Substack and ultimately becoming like a content creator and being an enormously valuable one at that. And it was very resonant for me, because to me, like you achieved hero status publishing a book about your life experience that like had an enormous impact on people. And it's a book that's now having, I think you're releasing a second edition of The Making of a Manager, which everybody should get. Christmas is coming. Give it to your niece or your nephew or your cousin. But I'm curious to know, like reflecting back on that exercise, two questions. One, what did it end up doing for you that was maybe unexpected or that still is kind of paying dividends? And then two, if there was going to be a sequel, what would be the crux of a second book? What would you want to do that's sort of comparable? What news story is forming in your head? Because I refuse to believe that you don't have something in the back burner there.
Yeah. Probably the greatest gift of The Making of a Manager is that I think it made me a better manager. And that was really what I was hoping for. Because this is a pattern that I observed with my writing, is that when I write and I sit down to really think about something, it kind of tidies up all these like messy strands of thought in my head. So I kind of, I always call it, it's like self-therapy. It's like I'm writing letters to myself. I'm writing the thing that I need to read or internalize, right? And, you heard me say before, like I have this theory that like, again, a lot of times our intellectual or rational mind understands something far before like it's, our subconscious or the like the instinct does. And so it is much easier for me sometimes to sit down and be like, no, this is like rationally what I think is really good. I can't often make it happen. Like I'm not like instinctively doing the thing yet. But if I just maybe, marinate in this like area of like, this is what I think great would look like, then it's like somehow going to seep in. It's going to make it easier for me to, because again, I go back to like, most of what we do is subconscious, right? Which is like, go through the day. I think there's some stat that's like 80% of what we do is just because that's like, it's subconscious. And so that was the biggest thing. I think it like having to write this thing and every day, going home at night and like thinking about some topic of management really did make it, I think, seep in a little bit more. So that was like really a lovely thing. I was really surprised by its reception and the fact that actually people outside of tech found it useful. In my mind, I was like, oh, I know this world and I know it probably resonates for like me and my colleagues and maybe other companies that are similar to mine. But that's been really lovely to note that it seems like there's elements of it that are like very human and actually touch like lots of different companies. It has certainly made it easier for me to sell now that I'm like a SaaS founder, and sometimes people feel like they know me, which I love. Like it's sort of like, oh, cool. Like people maybe think that they know a little bit about me, and hopefully I am similar to my book. I don't know. Like my friends will tell me like, yeah, I think it kind of does sound like you when you go and read it. And I think that's like it's great because I always want to meet people and like connect with them, and it makes it a little easier to do so.
Any parting wisdom or thoughts on like the future of data and design and what you hope today's and tomorrow's builders kind of really internalize, like how they can meet the moment in their own way? What you know, if they were to sort of think about, okay, what's the one thing that I think I should really take in from Julie Zhuo and her experience thus far?
I think it's probably like the self journey. You know, when I look back on my founder journey, I do think so much of it is like I get better because, or the company gets better because I get better. And I get better because I am able to somehow confront some portion of myself that, you know, it goes back to like, it was feeling scared, was like insecure, was like, you know, a vulnerable portion of myself. And I realized that that's a cycle. It's like, it's probably never going to stop. Going back and finding a thing, being like, I'm really scared of this, but how do I work through that fear? Like, you know, not avoid the fear, not try to make it go away or not pretend like it doesn't exist, but like, how do I work through it? And I think it reminds me a lot of this age that we're in, you know, because I think about AI and like, okay, if past trends continue, eventually I do think we'll have a technology that probably will outdo us, right? Surpass us in our intellectual abilities, our ability to cognitively reason or just, you know, grasp knowledge, memory, all of this stuff. But I think the thing that AI cannot do is it can't really feel for us. You know what I mean? Like the only thing that we can do that's like uniquely, I think, ours or human is like feel what we feel. And I know it sounds like very touchy-feely, but like that's actually very unique to who we are and how we see the world. And I think that's really what the individual journey is at the end of the day. It's like, how do we confront and be with the things that we feel and the fact that like, you know, yes, how will it feel when we're not the smartest out there? How will we feel when like, you know, the things we always took pride in before might be changing? And how will it feel when our role is totally different because it's not going to be what it was like 5 or 10 and we're going to be beginners and we have to go and confront maybe the fear or the insecurity of that. It's like, what will we find inside of ourselves? Like, I feel like so many of the answers to the future of the world can be found like right here inside.
I love it. I always feel inspired when I talk to you, and in particular by how you lead through example. Thanks for spending the time with us today and sharing everything that you've learned thus far. I so appreciate you.
I mean, we've known each other now for almost like, I was telling Soleio earlier, like almost half my life. What a gift.
She can't shake me. Everybody, please, let's give Julie Zhuo a round of applause.
And Soleio.